10:45 back on the Sports Fix. You're listening to ESPN Radio and ESPNGo1.com. Adam Reardon, Chris Doring, Scott Brantley with you on this Wednesday morning. We'll talk a little Miami Hurricane football with Danny Money at CanesInsight.co. He joins us normally on Thursdays, but he's been kind enough to reschedule with us so that we can talk a lot of stuff about Miami as they've been in the news here recently. Danny, first of all, good morning. How are you?
Great. How you guys doing?
Doing well. Now, there's so many things I want to get into. Obviously, the decision to go ahead and self-impose another postseason ban, which will keep Miami out of the ACC championship game should they beat Duke this weekend. But to me, the more interesting story is one that has come out here over the last day and a half or so. Apparently, some attorneys for former players at Miami were sent a letter from the NCAA essentially saying if you don't get your clients to come cooperate with us, we're going to assume that everything Nevin Shapiro has said is true. I was sort of blown away by that. You may be less shocked than I was.
Yeah, I mean, well, for one thing, we know the NCAA doesn't have subpoena power, so they can't force the players to testify. So they kind of got to resort to things like this. Now, what they're going to say, because this is really bad PR for NCAA more than anything, it's already kind of hit Twitter. Some national college football writers are saying, what happened in due process? What is this? What they're going to say, I'm guessing, is that they have some sort of evidence against these players, whether it be receipts or photos or what have you. And in the absence of any counter, we're just going to assume that that's all true. In court, if a complaint's filed against you and you don't respond within 20 days, those allegations are taken to be true and a judgment is entered against you. So I can imagine them kind of making a parallel to that. Now, obviously, with the NCAA, making parallels to the legal system is always tricky because they are the judge, jury, and executioner. But, I'm not surprised by it. The investigation's winding down, and they're trying to wrap it up. So really, to me, this is just bad PR for the NCAA more than anything really surprising.
I think it's interesting. You make a good point to the fact that this is a private entity. The NCAA doesn't have to follow due process rules. In fact, players, when they sign their scholarships, ultimately agree to abide by rules that are much different than what we would go through if we were dealing with the government or dealing with a more public entity there. Now, with that being said, with the power that they are able to wield, does this appear to be more like a witch hunt to you? Obviously, you're probably a little bit more biased than some, but to some degree, is this a last-ditch grasping for straws effort, or is this more of as you said, culmination of an investigation that's gone on for a long time that has some pretty significant evidence against these players?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that contract. I imagine, obviously, you signed that contract when you signed with the University of Florida. And I don't think – have you got any of those checks when the NCAA college football comes out, the video game, and someone plays the 95-96 Gators and uses Chris Doring? Have you got any of those checks in the mail?
Believe me, I am very sensitive to that. And certainly who was it, the UCLA basketball player that was leading the charge?
Ed O'Bannon.
Yeah. So I definitely, I'm looking for some retribution on that right now, man.
But obviously, Canes fans feel it's a witch hunt. They pointed out that the investigator that sent the letters actually U of grad. I mean, I can't imagine that really had much to do with it. I don't think she's really the one calling the shot for this investigation anyway. She's a couple of years out of law school, so I think obviously, Canes fans feel persecuted. It's funny. You look at the NFL. You have Ed Reed getting suspended for a hit that took place in 2010. Mm-hmm. You have Jonathan Vilma getting affidavits filed from Greg Williams that are dated the day before an evidentiary hearing. So Canes fans definitely feel persecuted. My take is that really NCAA has to make a statement. They're going to make it a lot worse because it is Miami, because it was so publicized. None of the violations, most of the violations are minor, but obviously it's to the point where it can't be ignored. A unique situation where you have a booster who is just kind of spilling all the beans. Now, I mean, we all know that if some of these more notorious SEC schools, particularly some in the state of Alabama, if you were to pull the curtain on those schools, some of this kind of stuff would come out. But it's just the reality. It happened in Miami. I've been saying since the beginning we are going to get hit pretty hard, significantly hard. So none of this is really, again, not a surprise. The witch hunt thing, do I think there's certain elements of it that is done just for publicity because it's Miami, because the NCAA has been so scrutinized by the press certainly I think that does play a role. But a lot of it's just bad luck, and unfortunately that's been the case with Miami for the past few years.
Danny, all this affects a lot, the alumni to the boosters and everybody else. But the bottom line, it affects recruiting, and I know a lot of those daddies out there that were big Miami fans, back in the 80s and 90s, now have kids that are aspiring young high school athletes that might want to be a Miami Hurricane. Al Golden's in his second year at Miami, and I think has done a wonderful job. But it still boils down to how it affects recruiting. And right now, I'm sure a lot of kids are starting to look elsewhere that might have already committed to Miami.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, a lot of kids are really out of it from the jump. I think that's the bigger thing, whereas the pool of players that Miami can go get is cut off. It's harder to go to the national recruit who maybe has an interest in Miami but needs to be convinced and convince them. I think the kids that grew up liking Miami, the kids from down here, if it affects them, they're certainly hearing the negative recruiting from other schools, but I don't think it affects them as much. What it really does to Miami is limit the pool of kids they can go after, and forces them to go after kids that they know they have a really good chance with and have other factors in play, whether it's location or family lineage like a Kevin Olson or a Ray Lewis III. So it just sort of limits the pool they can go after. But what I think is interesting is if you look at Butch Davis's classes on probation, the three classes that preceded him, which were Dennis Erickson classes coming off, a tremendous decade of success in a national championship, were really poor classes. They had a lot of big-name recruits, but they only produced one first-rounder in 3 years. Now, Butch Davis's first three classes, which were on probation, produced 9 first-rounders. So I think what Golden's going to sell is, look, you can come in here, you can get a ton of playing time, we will be back, here's the blueprint, the Reggie Waynes, the Dan Morgans, the Santana Mosses, they went through it. You want playing time, you want to be part of building something, you can come here.
Danny Money, CanesInsight.co, our guest here on the Sports Fix. And Danny, let me ask you about how all this stuff is going to affect on the field. Miami's gone ahead and forfeited its opportunity to play in the postseason once again. We saw what happened last year when they decided to go ahead and self-impose last season. Team sort of mailed it in. What do you expect from this team on the road against Duke in their final game of this season?
I expect a better performance. I mean, part of it is the fact that Coach Golden can look at last year and say, do you want this to be your last game of the season looking like this? You can get some history that you can point to. And on top of that, there really aren't that many seniors. So if you're a junior, you're still a part of the program. You still have a future there. You're still invested. Whereas last year the seniors might have checked out and said, I can't play in a bowl, and the disappointment hit them a little harder. With this team, since there are so many people coming back, this is not only a statement to the nation type game, but also, the first game of next season. And they certainly still have high hopes for next season. So I think they will perform better. Obviously, it's not something you want going into your last game, but I do expect a better performance than last year against Boston College.
Danny, do you think that was a smart move, going with their self-imposed ban, given that they've never played in an ACC championship game and how close Miami was to actually realizing that first appearance there? I almost feel like the bird in the hand situation is better for, not the overall perspective of the program and the recruiting effort than it would be to forego it and not know what's going to happen next year down the road.
I do think it's better to take our medicine now, and that's in all phases. Coach Golden actually yesterday was interviewed a few times, and in each of his interviews he emphasized that we're only taking 15 players this year. Now, we have capacity for more, but what that tells me is that they're thinking about self-imposing scholarships already starting this year. So I think every penalty, whether it's the scholarship reductions or a bowl ban, Coach Golden would rather take it now so he can just move forward. One of the problems with the bowl ban next year is that not only does it affect next year's team, but it also affects this year's recruiting class because those recruits have to sign with the possibility of 1 or 2 more bowls being missed. So by taking the bowl ban now, not only do you give your young team, which is really doesn't have any seniors, a chance to compete next year, you can also tell the recruits, hey, we put this behind us. This is not something that's going to affect you. you can come in here not worrying about that kind of stuff. So I do think it's a smart move, and I do think if they self-impose scholarship reductions this year, that'll also be a smart move. You know, you'd want to have those smaller classes coming on the heels of the 32 kids that we signed last year. It'll lead to a better distribution.
Now, how about moving forward real quick? We got less than a minute. Moving forward to that 2014 class, which is one a lot of Canes fans and folks in the South Florida area have sort of tabbed as a pretty big crop of great football players.
Yeah, and they love the Canes. That's the thing. There's kids that grew up Canes fans and still love the Canes, even with this sanctions looming, that are 4 or 5-star talents. So I think next year's class will also be a small class like this year's class. But if they can do what they're trying to do and convince these kids that the future of the program is bright, it should be a pretty star-laden class.
Danny Money, CanesInsight.co. Check out the website. It's the best in the business, covering the University of Miami. And, heck, it's a lot of fun as well just to go there and peruse the boards as well. Danny, appreciate it. Happy Thanksgiving, my friend.
Same to you guys. Take care.
Appreciate it. Coming up on the other side of the break, hour number 2 of the Sports Fix. We'll kick it off with your daily dose of college football. You're listening to the Sports Fix on ESPN Radio. Doc Hall's has moved, and now the biggest sports nutrition store in Florida is right here in Ocala. Doc Hall's has sports-specific supplements, including their new runners and bikers section.